What's up, Psychedelic Investors? My name's James, and you're watching The Psychedelic Investor, your number one news source for psychedelic stocks. In today's episode, we're going to give you the third ever This Week in Psychedelic Stocks. So in this episode, we're going to first cover some sector-wide developments and then dive into some company-specific news. And please remember, if you enjoy this episode, to please like and subscribe to support the channel and continue its existence going forward. Enjoy the episode. To start today, we got some news from Norway, whose government is moving to decriminalize drug possession. On Friday, officials from the country's governing party unveiled the decriminalization legislation, which would make low-level possession a civil offense rather than one that carries a criminal penalty. Possession cases would also require mandatory treatment. So a really cool quote about this by their education minister, Guri Melby, is this: "We will no longer stand by and watch people being stigmatized and called criminals when in fact they are ill. Refusal to comply with substance misuse treatment could result in a fine, but not the threat of jail time under this proposal." And I just want to be clear with you guys, nothing in this bill is about research into psychedelics, but it's rather about ending the global war on drugs, and this is an essential first step in the normalization of these compounds as medicines. And here Norway is joining a global decriminalization trend, both of countries like Portugal and American states like Oregon. And to be clear, nothing here will immediately aid psychedelic investors like us, but it is a move towards the long-term environment that we need to profit substantially off of this. And more importantly, it will mean people will stop going to jail for deciding what to put in their own body. Treating addiction like a mental health crisis and not a crime crisis is essential for our society. Next up, we have an article which first appeared in financialnewsmedia.com entitled "With Recent Advancements, North America is Expected to Dominate Psychedelic Drugs Market." And this is a long article covering several different companies, but what I am interested in is several stats presented within the article. So first up, according to Data Bridge Market Research, the psychedelic medicines market is growing at an astounding 16.3% compound annual growth rate. This will mean that the total market will grow from just under $2 billion annually last year to just under $7 billion a year by 2027. This shows again the massive opportunity for us retail investors. If we can manage to invest in the winners of this field, let's say companies that grab $1 billion of that 7 available, there is a massive 10x or more potential here. The trick is, of course, choosing the right companies 6 years in advance. In this same article, they also mention a report done by a group called FarmyWeb, which states that LSD is expected to hold a major share of this said $7 billion. So while it doesn't give a prediction for the exact market share LSD will eat up, this is of course good news for companies like MindMed who are working with LSD. And the importance here isn't the exact numbers presented, but rather that the field in general is growing rapidly, which presents us with some bullish news. Next up, we have a story about researchers testing magic mushrooms to treat obesity. Dr. C. Lard Birmingham, an eating disorder specialist and epidemiologist, is working with psychedelics research startup NeonMind to design a study that examines whether the trippy drug could be effective for weight loss purposes. And as a side note, NeonMind is a public company. It's traded on the CSE under the ticker NEON. They are a very small company with a stock price around 28 cents Canadian and a market cap around $33 million. This study will take place at the University of British Columbia, though it is still in its design phase, so it will be quite some time before we ever see results. Getting into why this may work, psychedelics such as psilocybin may help alleviate some of the underlying psychological factors that lead to overeating, or undereating for that matter. Dr. Matthew Johnson, a researcher at Johns Hopkins University, and by the way, Matthew Johnson is one of the most important researchers in psychedelics of the last several decades, so when he says something, you should probably listen up. So anyhow, Johnson has said that the drug could potentially help with all kinds of behavior and addiction-related maladies, including overeating and undereating. And in fact, his team is actually doing their own psilocybin eating disorder study at the moment, though this is to treat anorexia. So basically here the idea is that if you're obese, you can't just take psychedelics and become skinny. That would be great, but that's not the case. Rather, psychedelics like psilocybin can help treat the underlying mental health issues that lead to overeating, such as addiction. And it's important to note that this would not be a silver bullet. Obesity is a complex issue, and it's often caused by other health factors. So in those scenarios, psilocybin probably wouldn't be of much help. But taking a step back, the fact that this trial is happening at all is very exciting, and it shows the potential breadth of the psychedelic medicines field and how it may be much larger than just treating depression, anxiety, etc. It can also be used to cure or treat other diseases which are essentially externalities of mental health disorders, like in some cases obesity or anorexia. And I don't know if this trial will be successful, but its existence is a bullish sign for us retail investors. Our next story is a trial which comes from Australia and was published in the Journal of Translational Psychiatry. This study looked at the effectiveness of treating patients with chronic suicidality, or in other words, people who constantly think about suicide, with ketamine. And apparently this is the first such study of its kind, and the results were, well, frankly guys, they're pretty spectacular. The top line number is that 2/3 of patients experienced a significant reduction in suicidal thoughts after taking oral doses of ketamine for 6 weeks. To put this into researcher speak, the authors wrote that overall, oral ketamine led to significant short-term and prolonged improvements in suicidal ideation, affective symptoms, well-being, and socio-occupational functioning in this sample of adults with a history of chronic suicidality and major depressive disorder. So obviously this is extremely positive news. Ketamine and its derivatives are already on the market to treat depression. For example, Johnson & Johnson has a nasal ketamine spray. And this just shows how effective it can be. Again, looking at this with a wider lens, the overarching signals we keep getting whenever psychedelic research is done continues to be very positive. Even if from time to time we get studies like the one from the Royal College of London, which said that the effects of microdosing probably is just caused by the placebo effect, the vast majority of studies that are being published give us reasons to be hyper bullish on the industry as a whole. And our last general story before moving into the company-specific news is a fun one. There was an article published in The Soapbox called "The Outlaw Chemists Who Deserve a Cut of the Psychedelic Gold Rush." And the general thrust of this article is that we should be allowing the psychedelic pioneers of decades past who worked underground and illegally to join companies profiting from psychedelic medicines despite their criminal records. And I agree with this 100%, but that's actually not why I'm talking to you guys about this. The reason I'm actually doing it is because in the article it talks mostly about a guy named William Picard, who I'm not sure if you've heard about before, but he was once called the Acid King. And Picard was an underground chemist who for decades helped supply the black market with drugs like LSD and MDMA. So anyhow, in 2000 his car was pulled over by police in Kansas in a routine stop. But rather than trying to bluff his way out of this, Picard just fled the scene on foot. And in his car, the police officer found more than 40 kilograms of LSD and similar drugs. And for those of you wondering the street value of 40 kilos of LSD, well, it's more than $8 billion. That's right, $8 billion with a B. That is more than the entire psychedelic medicines market is estimated to be at in 2027, and it was found in this guy's car. Hilariously, they also found in his car a pamphlet entitled "How to Escape Federal Prison Camp." But sadly for Picard, the information in that pamphlet was obviously faulty, because after being found by the police and sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences, he never escaped. He was, however, released on compassionate grounds last year, and the author of this news article thinks he should now get a piece of the legal LSD market. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Alright, moving into company-specific news, we will of course start with MindMed, ticker symbol MMEDF on the American OTC market, MMED on the Canadian NEO market, and MMQ on the Frankfurt Exchange. And for this video I'm going to be using the American figures of the MMEDF ticker. So MindMed stock performed sideways this week, starting Monday at $2.79, and it closed Friday at $2.80. And this is to be expected. There was only one piece of news this week, and it didn't really change the long-term outlook for the company. And the news that I'm talking about is, of course, the fact that MindMed raised another $15.4 million, bringing their total cash on hand to $162 million. And this is extremely important because it means MindMed now has a large enough war chest to both continue funding their many clinical trials trials and also withstand any potential market downturn. I actually covered this at length in its own video this week, so rather than repeating myself, I'll just put a card above to anyone who wants to check it out. The video is called MindMed Raises $19.5 million. What does this mean for MindMed? Plus, upcoming market crash? ? It's a good video, go check it out. Next up, we have Compass Pathways, ticker symbol CMPS on the NASDAQ exchange. And like MindMed, Compass traded sideways this week. It opened Monday at $40.92, and it closed out Friday at $41.30. And Compass also didn't have too much news this week. Importantly, however, they released their Q4 financial results and held a conference call. The highlights of this are that Compass spent around $60 million in 2020, which is up triple from the year before. They can sustain this, however, because of their massive war chest of $190 million, which they say is enough to fund them into 2023. In the conference call, they also highlighted that their phase 2b clinical trial treating treatment-resistant depression with their own proprietary form of psilocybin, COMP360, was going very well, and they expect results to be presented by the end of this year. And this is the most advanced clinical trial of any public company in this space, so it's important that we keep an eye on this. The company also discussed how they are now starting to treat other maladies like anorexia with COMP360, as well as creating novel compounds. And honestly, guys, this conference call made me much more bullish on Compass than I already was. Before listening to the call, I was personally ranking MindMed way above Compass just because of their super expansive clinical trial pipeline. But it appears that within a year or two, the size of Compass's pipeline will be about equal to that of MindMed's. I definitely suggest checking out my recap of this conference call. I'll put a card above. It changed my mind significantly on the company, and though I was already a shareholder, it increased my confidence levels in the company. Next up, we have some news on Atai Life Sciences, and remember, Atai is not yet public, but intends to have an IPO later this year. When it does, it will automatically be considered for the title of the most advanced psychedelic medicines company, as it has a pipeline that looks very similar in size and scope to MindMed's. So, the news from this week comes from one of their Miami-based companies called DemeRx, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but I don't know. And this is a company working on treating opioid use disorder with ibogaine. And this week, they announced that they have received approval from the UK Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency to commence subject enrollment in a phase 1 and 2A clinical trial of ibogaine HCI, also known as DMX-1002. And the phase 1 portion of the approved trial will be conducted at the Manchester Clinical Unit of MAC Clinical Research, one of Europe's largest clinical development organizations. Speaking on this development, Srinivas Rao, and I'm sure I'm saying that name wrong, so I'm sorry, Srinivas, but Srinivas Rao, the Chief Scientific Officer and co-founder of Atai, said this. This approval allows DemeRx to progress clinical research beyond the previously published uncontrolled studies with ibogaine into well-designed controlled studies in support of regulatory processes. With the initiation of this trial, we start a journey towards understanding the potential of DMX-1002 in line with regulatory bodies. We are optimistic for the future of DMX-1002 in treating OUD. This is a great step forward for DemeRx. So this is obviously very good news for Atai, and it seems that every week we're getting more news on upcoming clinical trials, which makes me ever more bullish on the company. As for the specific trial, it seems that DemeRx is going to put Atai in direct competition with MindMed, who is working on an ibogaine derivative called 18MC to treat addiction. And though MindMed is set to enter phase 2 trials later this year, so they are ahead in the race for now, ultimately, it may come down to whose compound is more effective, which will take years to sort out. But the fact that we're starting to have a robust competition to treat mental maladies like addiction with psychedelics is very positive for the world. Next up, we're going to look at Numinus, ticker symbol NUMI. And NUMI actually performed quite well this week. It opened Monday at $1.28 Canadian and closed Friday at $1.40. And the news we have this week is that Numinus is expanding the size of their psychedelic research lab in Vancouver by 7,500 square feet later this year. This expansion announcement comes after Numinus received amendments to its federal licenses under Canada's Controlled Drugs and Substances Act to allow the possession, production, assembly, sale, export, and/or delivery of a variety of psychedelics, including ketamine, LSD, mescaline, DMT, MDMA, psilocin, and psilocybin. Whew! So we covered this last week, so I won't go too into detail right now, but I'll put a card above to last week's episode if you want to check out more details on the expansion of their federal license. But high level, obviously the fact that Numinus is expanding its physical lab space to accommodate their growing fields of research is good news. And any investors in Numinus should be happy with their rate of expansion. I still don't rank Numinus in my top 3 companies, but if they continue to have good news like this, and perhaps one day they can be mentioned in the same breath as MindMed, Atai, and Compass. And the last company that we're going to be looking at today is CYBIN Corp, ticker symbol CLXPF on the American OTC market, and CYBN on the Canadian NEO market. Like most other companies, CYBIN traded sideways this week, starting Monday at $1.10 and closing Friday also at $1.10. The first piece of news that we got this week on CYBIN is that it has begun trading in the United States on March 8th on the OTC market. And like I just said, the new ticker is CLXPF. So if you're an American and you're able to invest in companies on the OTC market, you are now able to buy CYBIN. And of course, if you're Canadian, the NEO market is still available. So this is big news for the company because it will greatly expand the number of people who can invest in it, and it should create an upwards pressure on the stock price. Next up, CYBIN also released their Q4 financial updates this past week, and the big highlight is that after a January capital raise, the company now has more than $70 million in the bank in Canadian dollars. Well, this pales in comparison to the more than $200 million that MindMed has in the bank in Canadian dollars, and Compass and Atai have even more than that. $70 million is still nothing to scoff at. However, CYBIN spent around $11.5 million last quarter, so assuming costs rise as they expand, the company has enough money for perhaps a little less than 2 years, meaning they will need to do more capital raises in the near future. And look, I'm not invested in CYBIN, but it's definitely a company to keep an eye on going forward. So, taking a step back and examining everything we have discussed in this episode, though there were not many company-specific highlights, it is clear that the wider space in general is marching forward. The fact that so many studies are about to commence is very exciting. It means that within a few years we should have definitive proof, one way or the other, about the efficacy of treating mental health issues with psychedelics. If it turns out that it is very efficacious, then early investors in this field could stand to make a killing, and that is the reason that this channel was created, to share this apparent opportunity that I see with you guys. Look, I'm not a financial advisor, and this is not financial advice. I am just a retail investor like you that thinks they have spotted a massive long-term opportunity. So please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the episode to support the channel and keep it alive going forward. You'll see a return on your investment in the form of continued information that you need to know before investing in the psychedelic medicines field. Alright guys, this is James from the Psychedelic Investor, signing out. I'll see you next time.